Hello, welcome to the Raw podcast. My name's James Copley from the Sunderland Echo. Today I am joined by Matt Scrafton of the Burnley Express, who has very kindly agreed to help us preview the game in the Championship on this Friday. It's a top of the table clash. Matt, how are you doing?
Very well. Thanks, James. Thanks for having me. Yeah, very good. Looking forward to another big game.
Yeah, absolutely. How are Burnley shaping up? Because I think the eye-catching thing from Burnley this season has been the ridiculous statistic that you've only actually conceded 9 goals in the Championship, which is it's ludicrous, really. It's the 14th of January. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it is, and you're right. I mean, you use the word ludicrous. I've been sort of running out of words to describe it. It is a bit crazy, really, and it's strange. It's only recently, sort of last few weeks, I've noticed it's picked up a bit of traction elsewhere. You know, I saw the EFL tweet about it, and other clubs sort of picking up on it. But yeah, 9 goals in 26 games. I think that's an average of sort of 0.35 per game. I worked out the other day. It's pretty much one goal conceded in every 3 games. Pretty much works out as. And to be honest, well, not that it could be a coincidence, but it's no coincidence whatsoever. You watch Burnley games and they don't give up chances. I'm sure we'll get onto it, but at the other end, they don't create a great deal of chances either, but they do have quality to score at the other end. But yeah, a lot of their games can be quite stodgy. There's been quite a few 0-0s, quite a few 1-0s, as we saw in the first game between the two sides. But yeah, you look back and you think back in hindsight and you think, I don't remember like lots of missed chances that other teams have had. It's not like they're lucky to have 9. If anything, you look at the 9 and think it could actually be fewer. That's how good they've been defensively. It's been scandalous, really. And it's not necessarily, obviously James Trafford is a very good goalkeeper, but it's not necessarily one person or again, they've got good individuals in defence. It's not just the back 5. It's the way that Scott Parker sets them up, which again, I'm sure we'll get onto it. They're very, very well structured, very well organised. Like I said, it's not by chance. It's not like other teams are missing lots of chances every week. Even think back to the Sunderland game, which was probably Burnley's worst performance this season. The Sunderland were very good for sort of 20, 30 minutes. They've got their goal and deserved got the win. But even for the rest of the game, it wasn't like Sunderland had lots of clear chances and should have won 2-3-0. And that was the worst Burnley played this season. And there were reasons behind that, as I'm sure we'll get onto as well. And then the Leeds game as well. They won 1-0 away at Leeds. Leeds didn't really have anything. They had one sort of chance in the first minute, but apart from that, didn't really have anything. So it's not like, they have this great record against the lower side. It's also against Leeds, Blackburn didn't score the other week. Middlesbrough didn't score. Sheffield United didn't score. They're very, very well. If anything, they're better defensively against the better side as well because they're so well organised.
Yeah, it's interesting that we'll come on to the earlier meeting between Sunderland and Burnley just a little bit later. But in terms of that defensive record, you touched on it. At the other end of the pitch, Burnley have scored the least goals in the top 6 with 31. What's the sort of mood within the fan base about that? Because obviously that defensive record is so exceptional. Are fans sort of pleased with that, or would they like a bit more in an attacking sense? Sort of where are they at under Scott Parker? Because obviously Burnley are right at the top challenging, but in modern football, we know that style can be quite important, can't it?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it has gone up and down. That's the mood amongst fans. I mean, it's ironic. The season started out with 9 goals scored in the first 2 games. They won 4-1 away at Luton on the opening day, then 5-0 against Cardiff. You're thinking, right, okay, Burnley are going to storm the Championship, but at that time, obviously, they basically had the same squad that was there from the Premier League last season. And in the following week or two, that was very quickly dismantled before that Sunderland game, which again we'll get onto. But since then, so that works out as only sort of 22 goals scored since those first two games. I think he scored 31 now. And at first, I think fans were understanding because of that sort of madness in the transfer market, losing all their best players, and they were very understanding in the first place about Parker was stressing the need to set those foundations. And there were a lot of 0-0 draws or 1-0 wins, and there were a few games that come to mind. I mean, I think they beat Portsmouth in the last minute, 93rd minute. It was an awful game, but they got the win, and fans were like, okay, well, we get it. If you're going to grind out wins, we understand. Then there was a period where I think they scored 4 in 8 games. And again, it was against not the strongest opposition. That they've struggled more this season against teams that do sit back. They drew 0-0 with Preston, with QPR, with Derby. Those, not to be critical, but those sort of teams, lower mid-table teams that are quite happy to come to Turf Moor and not play for a draw, but will happily take a 0-0 draw if that happens. that's what happens. So there was sort of a month or so where fans were starting to get frustrated, and you got to remember as well the last time Burnley won the Championship, they won the league with over 100 points under Vincent Kompany playing this lovely flowing football. So there was that inevitable sort of, well, last time we did this, why can't we? Not to say that Burnley fans were demanding exactly the same, but I think Burnley fans, rightfully so to an extent, were saying, well, we need to see a bit more than this. 0-0s against this lower mid-table team. Even if we finished, it gets us over the line, finish second. As you said, people do want more style and substance now, don't they? They want a bit more. But to be fair, since then, sort of November, December onwards, we have seen things begin to click. They are playing some better football. The issue was, they've got the players, they've got the quality. The issue was the patterns of play necessarily wasn't there. It was a lot of sideways passing, a lot of backwards passing, a lot of keeping the ball, controlling the game, which is Scott Parker's really big about controlling games. And I remember when Scott Parker was first appointed, I spoke to sort of reporters from Fulham and Bournemouth, and he said it can be very, very similar to Gareth Southgate's England when it was very much playing against those, the qualifiers at Wembley, when it was we keep the ball and we control games, but it's not the best watch. But since then, they have clicked. I mentioned the 4 goals scored in 8 games. They followed that with, I think in 4 straight games, they scored twice in each game, which might not sound like much. I don't know someone's record, but like Leeds, for example, score a lot of goals. It might not sound like much, but when you compare it to what it was come before, it has definitely improved. And then we saw again, sort of over the festive period, where the same for every club. It's just a grind, isn't it? It's just it's really difficult. They went not backwards, but went back to those sort of 0-0s and 1-0s just to grind out those results, which again I think is completely understandable because they performed really well over the Christmas period. I think they would have fallen, drew 2. So it's earned those results and earned those points, and they're the second down the table on the point off top spot, Leeds in top spot. So it has worked, but it won't be interesting to see now they've had that little bit of break. Scott Parker rested pretty much all of his first team players for the FA Cup at the weekend. How that now they come back refreshed if it's going to be another sort of stodgy 0-0, 1-0 either way sort of game, or if they do sort of refine that a bit more feed, a bit more creativity, which we have seen in the last sort of month or so.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of that first game at the Stadium of Light, which was back in August, Sunderland won that 1-0. Romain Mundle scored. Dan Neil also got sent off. The squad that day, there was a lot said about Burnley's squad that day. I take it it's a lot more settled now. When we played you back in August, there seemed to be a lot of churn and flux, which you've hinted towards. There was still some multi-million-pound players on the pitch, but it felt very unsettled. I remember Scott Parker in his post-match press conference that day, he was unsettled. It was the transfer market was still open. It just felt like Burnley were in a little bit of a spot where you didn't quite know exactly where it was going to go from there, but obviously they've since picked up.
Exactly that. You summed it up perfectly there. That was the issue there. I actually looked at the team again this morning and just to see what it was, and it wasn't actually that bad. The starting 11 wasn't that bad. The starting 11 was fine. As you said, you had the Josh Cullens, the Josh Brownlees, Lau Foster, James Trafford, Max. It was a fine starting 11, but there were sort of 1 or 2 in there who have since sort of left. Like Hanno Masengo, he's left on loan. He's not had a sort of a look in. And then the bench, I can't remember the number, but I think there were 3 or 4 youngsters on the bench and they had nothing really. Once it became clear they weren't really offering much as the game wore on, there wasn't much to change it off the bench. So that was the issue. But as you rightly say, the issue wasn't necessarily the team they selected on the day, it was the lead up to it. As you mentioned, the post-match press conference, I asked Scott Parker about Dara O'Shea, and I remember his demeanour had changed completely because I gather Dara O'Shea was in his plans, was going to start centre-back, as he had done for the couple of games before. He'd started both games, and all of a sudden he wasn't in the squad. And then I think 2 days later he's gone to Ipswich, that was just one. I'm sure that I think that sort of that week leading up to it, and then the week following, which I think, if my memory serves me right, it's a bit of a blur now. But I think that following week was the last week of the transfer window, where again
he seemed spiky at that point. I remember.
Well, that's the only time Scott Parker's been an absolute pleasure to deal with. But that one time after Sunderland was, and a couple following, when we sort of followed up on it and asked what had been going on. But that post-match Sunderland is the one that Burnley fans often look back on as well. But that's the one time that Scott Parker's really come across as not spiky, because I thought he answered the question fine, but you could clearly see he had some emotion pent up and he had a lot of frustration pent up. And but yeah, you look at the summer transfer window in total. I can't remember the numbers, but I think 18 came in and 20 left. So it was a chaotic window, but it all came to a head in those sort of 2 weeks, and the Sunderland game came right in the middle of it. So an excuse, because like I said, I think the Burnley team that started the game was could have got a result there, could have easily got a draw and grinded out a win, but they didn't turn up on the day, and Sunderland deservedly won. But there were plenty of factors behind it. Whereas now on Friday night they're a lot more settled, completely settled, and even though they're doing business in the transfer window, it's a lot more sort of under control and planned, let's say. Whereas back then for the Sunderland game, it was just reacting to what was happening because players were leaving left, right, and centre. Players were sort of saying we don't want to play for Burnley, like we don't want to be here, basically. And Parker was quite stressed that quite a few times, where he said we only want players that want to be here, and that's the situation now. They've got a lot more settled team and players that actually want to play for the club.
Oh, it's very interesting. The spot that those two teams were in back then, Sunderland was sort of tentatively discovering themselves as a squad under a new manager, Regis Labrie. I would say they've probably progressed from there. Obviously, they've added a few more attacking threats. They're a bit more stable in the formations and tactics. Regis Labrie often talks about his game plan. I think that's pretty solid now. They've added a few facets to the game that can go 4-3-3, 4-4-2. So I'm very interested in this game, and I guess what makes it fascinating, really, in a sense, Matt, is that it is a top of the table clash. It could tell us a lot about who's got the minerals to go and get automatic promotion. It could mean a lot come the end of the season, but the two teams actually are in pretty different places from where they were in August.
Yeah, I'll say it would be a completely different game. I think the scoreline will be fairly similar. I think it'll be, there won't be many goals, I don't think, but I think it will be a completely different game. It's in terms of individuals, Burnley look very different. I'm sure Sunderland do as well, but Burnley look very different. But yeah, I think Burnley fans will be very confident. Their record against the top sides, apart from that one game, again, which there were extenuating circumstances. As I said, they've beaten both Leeds and Sheffield United away. The only teams to beat them at their home grounds this season, and did it very well. Did it without conceding a goal. Drew with Middlesbrough, probably should have won that just after Christmas. Probably should have won that one, but then they followed it up with a win in the derby at Ewood Park and at the start of January. So yeah, the record, other than the Sunderland game, is very good, and I think Burnley actually are at their best when they're playing against these top sides, because defensively they give nothing away, and then they do have that quality at the other end, especially with Josh Brownlee, the top goal scorer of 9 from midfield. He seems to be the one that gets on the end of these crosses in, these chances. He's the one that seems to makes a decisive sort of moments in these big games.
Let's talk about Josh Brownhill, actually, because I made a note of him coming into the game and the podcast. Obviously, you mentioned the 9 goals, but obviously 3 assists there. It's a fantastic return, really. Obviously, he was bought for quite a bit of money, and he's sort of been through obviously the Premier League relegation season with Burnley as well. We're expecting him to leave in this summer. Has he had suitors elsewhere? Was it a bit of a coup to keep hold of him? Because he seems a cut above, really, in terms of his numbers.
Yeah, there's constant talk about him. He's got contracts he's out of contract at the end of the season, so there's constant talk, and obviously linking with teams abroad who can obviously they can agree a pre-contract agreement now. We've asked Scott Parker about it. Obviously, he wants to tie Josh Brownhill down, but I think he's sort of well in his rights to sort of see how it goes, because it depends obviously on what happens in the next sort of 4 or 5 months and on if they get promoted or not. Because he's more than capable of playing in the Premier League, although he is sort of ironically one of those yo-yo players, similar to how Burnley, a bit of a yo-yo club, he's too good for the Championship. In the Premier League, I'm not saying he's not good for the Premier League. He is good enough for the Premier League, but he's really too good for the Championship. And in the Premier League, teams like West Ham have been linked, but you do think, would he be a regular start for West Ham? I'm not sure. Because obviously, they'll have a lot of quality, and they've got the ability to bring in players with big fees as well. But yeah, he's an interesting player, Josh, because there was a period where it's quite ironic. Some Burnley fans, again, it's social media, so you use it with an asterisk. I'm sure we all see lots of silly comments, but people said, just Josh Brown will bring enough to sort of the overall play, the build-up play, the link-up play. He's not really bringing much. To be fair, that's not necessarily he's a quality player. He's technically very good, but his ability, his strength is getting on the end of those crosses, being the person at the back post, sticking a header. You might not notice him for the whole game, but then he'll be the man that decides the game, and that says it all. And when you read out his numbers, you can't really argue that, especially when Burnley don't really have many goals coming from elsewhere, so they can't really afford to be sticking a player of his quality on the bench.
Just moving back to the game on Friday, what are you expecting in terms of style and the way that these two teams will mesh? I asked this question because it's sort of a little bit of irony, really, isn't it? The sense that Burnley came up to the Stadium of Light. they had the majority of the possession. Sunderland got the goal, and they grounded out with a really quite admirable defensive performance. Now it seems that shoe is on the other foot now. Sunderland are the scorers. Burnley are the good defensive unit. However, you have to take into account that Burnley are at home as well. So just thinking about how this game's going to go down, I'm not necessarily sure. Sunderland have shown in games that they're willing to give up possession, particularly away from home, but they will try and get teams on the counter and have a goal, reduce the breeze, and attack a manager, I would say. So I'm intrigued, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd imagine that'd be the case, especially with Burnley at home. I think they will look to control the game, but perhaps not as extreme as it has been at times. When I touched upon that period where it was a lot of dominance of the ball, they would, I can't quote exact games, but I would often look at possession stats during the game and it would be sort of over 70%. It's not quite as extreme as that now. It has dipped down a little bit. So they will look to control the game, but not for the sake of having the ball, just for the sake of it, basically. But they might give up the odd, chance on the counter to risk scoring a goal themselves. They have sort of relented a little bit, but again, it's not like these chances on the counter attacks of a player from 4 yards out. It's not like it's a clear cut chance every game. But there's perhaps a blueprint, not giving too much away, but Middlesbrough at the start of December, they played out 1-1 draw at Turf Moor, but they did cause a few problems on the counter. They did pose 1 or 2 questions. So there's definitely something there for someone where they can have some success. But yeah, I'd imagine. I mean, Burnley set up with the same formation every game. It's a 4-2-3-1 every game. The starting lineups are pretty predictable. I mean, there's 1 or 2 maybe question marks this week. So obviously, I think 1 or 2 players, quite a few players impressed in the FA Cup against Reading when they made all 11 changes, and maybe they can come in. And Hannibal suspended, so there's sort of question mark who will play on the left wing. But apart from that, it's been nailed down who will play. So I'm not saying Burnley will be predictable, but I think, there won't be too many surprises in their starting lineup, and the way they're set up will try and control the board, control the game, take the sting out of it, and create chances when they can.
And reading between the lines of what you've just said there, and having had a little look at Burnley, it doesn't appear that there's too many injury issues at the moment either.
No, it's finally sort of clearing up. They have been all season. They've been at one point, I think, sort of 10 or 11, but it was consistently around the 7 or 8 mark. But it's now down to sort of 4 or 5. I think Hannibal's suspended, and I think there's 4. Some really good players in there, to be fair. Players that haven't played all season, been out with long-term injuries. People like Aaron Ramsey, who was a really big success with Middlesbrough last time in the Championship. He sort of got picked up a big injury in the Premier League last season, not been seen since January or February last season. He would be a big difference in the final third. But again, Josh Brown plays at number 10, so it'll be interesting when he is fit, because I think he's getting closer where he plays, because Josh Brown has that position nailed down. But Nathan Redmond, who's still only 30, you think of him as a really sort of experienced player, which he is, but still only 30. He could still bring a lot. And it's that sort of final third where Burnley are looking in the transfer window, as we've seen last few days with sort of Morgan Whittaker being linked. It is that sort of players on the wing, perhaps up front where they do need to strengthen. And Manuel Benson, who had a massive impact under the Vincent Kompany promotion season. So players like that, who if they're all sort of in training, but been in training for a while, so it depends how close they are. But apart from that, it's finally cleared up, and there are. It's not as bad as it was. So Burnley, you look at Burnley's bench, and there has been times this season where we looked at the bench, it's not been the strongest, and he hasn't made that many changes, Scott Parker, because there's nothing really to sort of decide the game. If all of a sudden you've got people like Matt Trezor, who came back into Reading at the weekend, Emmanuel Benson and Nathan Redmond and players like that to turn to, then they're looking very, very strong for the second half of the season.
Morgan Whittaker, player you mentioned there, I was interested to see that link arise. Obviously, Burnley have apparently made an approach to Plymouth Argyle. He's a player linked with Sunderland previously, I think a couple of years ago. How likely is that to happen? And is that the area in which Scott Parker's looking for is attacking reinforcements? I did notice as well that the link with Jonjo Shelvey as well, training with the club, potentially on a free transfer. What's the latest in terms of Burnley and transfers at the moment? Yeah,
they're the 2 standout ones, really. Burnley in that sort of position of luxury, really, where they've got 1 or 2 spaces free where they can add, and I'm sure they will look to add. But even if a surprise happens and nothing happens for the window, they're still in a very strong. They're strengthening from position of strength already, so they're going to add to what they've already got. Jonjo Shelvey, it came out over a week ago that he was training with the club and looking for sort of a free transfer. He recently departed his club in Turkey, where he only made 6 appearances So I asked Scott Parker about that after the game on Saturday, and he confirmed that, we're sort of taking a look at him. Didn't seem as sort of definitive as the reports have made out. The reports that suggested it was pretty much already done deal. He sort of said, we'll take a look at him training. I did ask about his fitness because obviously he's not played much this season. He said, he looks fine. That's one area where they could look to strengthen, because they do have sort of 4 central midfielders for 3 positions, because they play the 2 deep and then Josh Brown just ahead. With Hannibal suspended as well, they are a bit light in that area of the pitch. So if they could add someone like John Joe Shelby, who as much quality he's got, he wouldn't be guaranteed to start every game, because they've got Josh Cullen, who's a regular starter, and Josh Laurent, who's done really well since coming from Stoke in the summer, and then Brownlee just ahead. So he would be one that maybe we could rotate with Josh Laurent. But again, he's a sort of player that you think they probably need, because he could unlock a defence with those sort of trademark balls, and he has a bit of creativity that they need. And then the Morgan Whittaker one is a predictable one, really. Burnley tried to sign him in the summer, very late on. Again, just after the summer game, I think it was, very late on, last day or two at the window. Couldn't get it over the line. Plymouth basically, Wayne Rooney at the time said, we're not sending our best player with his last minute in the window with no one to replace him. And I think they're in a similar situation this time around, even though there's still a couple of weeks to go. We all know the sort of struggles Plymouth have had this season. They're right in mind in the relegation battle. Are they going to give up Morgan Whittaker without a fight? I don't see it. I think the reports, especially from the Plymouth end, suggest Burnley's bid is sort of well below their valuation. I think they're looking for sort of over 10 million. Will Burnley go that high in January? I'm not sure. I'd imagine they'll go back in for him. It won't just be just one bid and that'll be it. I'd imagine they'll go back in for him and test the water. But I think Plymouth will definitely fight it. But that's the sort of player that Burnley need. That central midfielder and that player, especially a Morgan Whittaker, probably out on the left. So I think Jayden Anthony's done really well on the right wing. He's someone that Scott Parker really likes. He had him at Bournemouth as well. He really likes him. He's done really well, and he's a reliable player. He's always fit. I can't remember any game he's missed through injury, so he's a regular starter. But it's that one on the left where Luka Koleosho is a very talented player, but still only 19, 20, I think he is. And his form has been up and down. So if they can strengthen that on that left wing, I think that's what they'll look to do over the next couple of weeks.
I was having a look at Burnley's wider squad before the podcast, and one name that jumped out at me, who I'd forgotten was actually at Burnley, was John Egan, obviously former Sunderland player, came up through Sunderland's academy. Don't think he actually played a minute of senior football for us, but I noticed he's only got 162 minutes in the Championship. And I asked this question because I remember when Burnley signed him, I think it was in the summer, after his Sheffield United contract came to an end. I thought, that's a signing that could make a difference. Experienced, obviously played a lot in the Premier League. I sort of just expected him to be a regular starter for Burnley, but it hasn't happened. And I had a little look through the games, and he's been on the bench quite a lot, hasn't he? So it's not an injury that's kept him up. What's been the situation with him?
Yeah, he's done nothing wrong. Absolutely done nothing wrong. But at the same time, he can have no complaints because the two ahead of him have just been absolutely brilliant. Maxime Esteve, left side centre half, Frenchman, brought in last January in the Premier League. He was absolutely brilliant in the Premier League, and he's dropped down to the Championship. And they expected him to leave before the league the season got underway. He's too good for the Championship, really. A very sort of composed, calm player. Got quality on the ball. He's a definite starter. And then it was positioned next to him was the question mark, and it was Joe Worrell, another quality player who started the season after signing from Nottingham Forest. He got promoted with Forest. He that first season he did play in the Premier League with Forest, but then sort of dropped out last season. I mean, Joe Worrell can consider himself very unlucky not to play more often as well. You've got two very good centre-backs in reserve there. But then he picked up just a short injury at the start of the season. And CJ Egan-Riley, which has been sort of the story of Burnley's season, really, because he wasn't fancied by Vincent Kompany last season. He's been out of it. He's been out on loan with Hibs and in Holland with, not in PSV, it was the young PSV team, young PSV, it's called. Yeah. And if, by all accounts, I don't remember hearing a great deal. I don't think he put up any major trees, but then came back, got his opportunity when Wall picked up a slight injury, and he's been Burnley's player of the season. He's been the best player. He's been the story of their season. And now all of a sudden he's at contract, and now the story is we can't afford to lose him. When it was only 4 or 5 months ago, Burnley fans probably didn't even remember that he stood at the club because he would have been fifth or sixth choice in the pecking order. Now it's him and Maxime Esteve. And Scott Parker's sort of talked about, John Egan and Joe Wall, two centre-backs that are absolute quality for this division. But he sort of said he almost got quite emotional, like he feels very sorry for these two players. And any other season, any other club probably, they would be regular starters. But, I'm sure they understand as well. They look at these two centre-backs, they're part of a defence that conceded 9 goals this season. And I think it's even numbers even more ridiculous. I think between the two of them, when they've started Esteban, Egan Riley, I think they conceded 6 goals between the two of them. So yeah, you're right. They're very lucky to have these options. And we saw them together against Reading in the FA Cup on Saturday, and they were both absolute quality, as you'd imagine. So yeah, if Burnley do pick up a knock-on issue there, they've got two very good players, but I don't think they can have too many complaints because the two that are ahead of them have been supreme.
Yeah, you don't have much ammunition, do you, really, if you're Worrell or Egan knocking on Storm Parker's door? And it's a pretty short conversation, isn't it? I would like to play well. We've already conceded 9 goals. End of discussion. Just quickly, Matt, before we round off, who worries you from a Sunderland point of view, having seen Sunderland a little bit, obviously not as regularly as Burnley, but just generally, who would be the danger men for you?
I'm trying to remember. Was it Rigg who scored the goal in the first game? I'm trying to remember. Yeah,
it was Romain.
I think it was. Oh, it was Mundell.
No, it was Romain Mundell. But Rigg played and had a very decent game. Mundell's actually injured now, so he won't be available.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say Rigg was the one that probably impressed me the most. I thought from that first game, from what we could take from one game, I was really impressed with the first 20, 30 minutes. Some of the energy levels. I know some of the lot is made of their youngsters and the youth and their energy, and that was sort of noticeable. That first 20, 30 minutes, Burnley couldn't handle it, and that's probably the most we've seen Burnley sort of come under pressure, not know how to handle a situation. They come under pressure in other games, but they come through it fine. And that first 20, 30 minutes at the Stadium of Light, I was really impressed. And then they got the goal, and as you said before, the rest of the game was a bit of nothingness, really, because they saw it out without too many issues. But yeah, Chris Rigg was the player that stood up for me with his energy. Again, I can't remember. I know a lot is made of Joby Bellingham because of his brother and because of his name. I've only seen that one game from him, so I can't say too much. Obviously, he's a name that you think of when you see someone starting 11. So I'll probably pinpoint those two. Be interested to see how Bellingham does on Friday night against people like Josh Cullen and Josh Brownlee who've been there, done it in the Championship. See how he fares.
Yeah, absolutely. And just lastly, what's your sort of gut feeling heading into this game? And I guess for the rest of the Championship season, do you feel Burnley will perform against Sunderland and get the win? And more generally, does this feel like a promotion season to you?
I think it does. Yeah, I think as I touched on a few times, there was that sort of October period where it was unsure. It felt like it would probably be 3rd or 4th. I think since then they really kicked on. They're going to strengthen in January. They're signing players from a position of strength now. They've got quality. They've got strength and depth. They've proved against the best sides in the league, in Leeds and Sheffield United, that they can beat them. It's quite interesting. They've got Leeds coming up as well at home this month. It's a really big month for them. But yeah, I'm quite confident. At one point, I didn't think it would be Leeds first, and then one other, probably Sheffield United or Burnley or Sunderland, one of those, 1 from 3. But since the last 5-6 weeks, I'm very confident that Burnley will get the job done. I think Scott Parker's been there, done it. He's done it twice. He just seems to have moulded a team that, even though it's quite a young team compared to how it was before all the signings in the summer, they've got a know-how about them. They've got an experience. They manage games very well. They just seem like a team and a squad set up for promotion. Everything's there. All the ingredients are there. They just need to go out and do it, and they're doing it at the moment. And as for the game on Friday, I think it'll be a typical Burnley game. It'll be a 0-0 or 1-0. So I'll go for 1-0 with Josh Brownlee being the decisive factor. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's another 0-0. I think they've had 6 or 7 already this season, so it will be tight. I'll be surprised if there's sort of more than it might be 1-1, but I can't imagine it be any more than that. I think no team in the Championship this season has scored more than once against them. So I'd be surprised. I know some are a good team, but I'd be surprised if that changes for Burnley this week, Friday night. Sorry.
Oh, very interesting indeed. Well, I wish you luck, Matt, but not too much luck, obviously, because I would quite like Sunderland to go and get the job done. Thanks to everybody for joining, Matt. Just tell us where we can find your work if we'd like to read about how Burnley is shaping up before the game. Yeah, all on the Burnley Express website. Plenty of content on there on Twitter or X or what you want to call it now, under Matt _Scrafton on X as well. So plenty of content on there ahead of the big game. Well, thank you very much. Cheers for joining us, Matt. You can also find all of the latest Sunderland news over the Sunderland Echo website. And thank you very much